Hello, my name is Joshua Beauchamp, and this is my TOK presentation. I'm calling it sensory perception, but really we're going to deal with hearing, and more specifically the loss of hearing, or even how that hearing relates to the world. I'm a drummer, and as most people know, drummers are hard of hearing. They end up losing their hearing, and one day when I was drumming, I noticed a ringing in my ears. Well, that ringing is tinnitus, and tinnitus is generally associated with hearing loss. And, it kind of freaks me out at a young age, but one of the things that got me thinking about is what if I lose my hearing, maybe not now, but 10, 20 years down the road? Am I still going to relate to the world as I do now, being able to associate sounds with some kind of meaning? And it got me thinking that to what extent does hearing or just sensory perception affect my relationship to the world? And that's going to be the knowledge question I'm pursuing today. There are, though, a couple limitations that knowledge question has, one of which being is that it deals with a loss of sensory perception. But there are people that are born blind or deaf. I mean, maybe even they don't have the ability to touch, but there are people that don't have sensory perception when they come into the world. And so a loss of it is going to be a little bit different than not having it at all. And one of those things is that how do people, let's say deaf people, who, if I'm losing my hearing, I'll relate myself to a deaf person, how is it that they think? Because even if I lose my hearing, I still understand what words are or how they sound to me because I've been reading and I've been speaking with people. But someone who is born deaf cannot relate letters or vowels to sounds. So they have that association of that grouping of a visual word without how it sounds, but they can still associate a picture with it. So how exactly do they think if they can't think in words? And one of the areas of knowledge that I want to look at in relations to that is imagination. When we imagine things, people who have hearing or have that sensory perception with the world, we generally think in words, and then we might paint a picture or be descriptive in our own mind. That's because we have a basic verbal language. Deaf people have a basic visual language. In America, they call it American Sign Language. There's French Sign Language and Pidgin Sign Language and all these different forms. Specifically, though, sign language is a visual-based language. You use your hands and you use your facial expressions and your body language even to associate objects and that language in order to gain some kind of meaning out of it. A deaf person will think, if you ever take the time to watch them think, out loud, but without words. So they will use their hands, they will sign to themselves in order to paint the picture in their head. Well, that raises a couple more questions, then you can see them thinking, and that's, a little bit of a privacy issue. But the point is that they relate to the world in a three-dimensional manner, while words, people who can hear, and sounds, is more of a two-dimensional basis. I can write a word down and be able to sound it out. But a deaf person can write the word down and be able to mimic it or pantomime it even with their hands. And that is a direct relationship to how someone who loses their hearing will see the world as opposed to someone who is born without hearing. Another example of this form of imagination or even more entertainment is movies. A hearing person goes to a movie and they see that, the actors are really getting into it and they feel the emotion and they listen to the script. And if the actor says something funny or sad, the audience, if they're hearing-based, is going to react to that. Well, a deaf person goes to movie theaters, and generally movie theaters don't have subtitles because they base it off someone who can hear. So how does the deaf person enjoy that form of entertainment? Well, they do it in a way that they enjoy the body language and they can still feel what the actor is trying to convey through the actor's motions or actions, even though they can't understand the words that are being said because they don't have that form of sensory perception. It's kind of a unique experience if you go to a movie theater and put earplugs in where you can't hear, but you can still see what's going on, and you can see through the expression of the actor that the actor is going through a sad time or is happy. And in that way, even though I don't have that form of language, I can still understand what the meaning is of the scene in the movie. And that's going to be my second area of knowledge, is language. I said before that deaf people have American Sign Language. That's their form of language, and it's visually based. But do they understand the world differently because it's visually based? If we go back to how a deaf person thinks and we look at it specifically through language, I still have thoughts, but my thoughts come in forms of words. A deaf person has thoughts, but they come in forms of images. And like I said before, if you watch a deaf person think, they will sit there and they will sign to themselves because that's how they think, in that three-dimensional manner. When you take a look at how a deaf person thinks and relate it to how a hearing person thinks, you find that the language is completely different. The word for flashlight starts with an F, and we all understand where it's going, flashlight, and we can associate that sound, that grouping of sounds, with an image. But a deaf person will associate an image with an object. And in that way, it sort of stops almost the process of abstract thinking. And that will definitely have a toll on how you relate to the world. There was a radio lab once that I heard called Words. And the radio lab had to do with a man that was born without a language. He was born deaf, and he wasn't able to really think for himself. He was not given the opportunity to learn sign language. This man would go out through the day and experience everything, and then he would go back to a group of buddies that were just like him, who did not have hearing and did not have a language, and they would pantomime the day's actions. And eventually, someone met him and taught him sign language. And as soon as he was able to understand that these visual objects he can make with his hand would relate to an object in the world, he began to think about things. He began to have ideas. And in the radio lab, it was even said that he couldn't hang out with the same kind of people anymore because their process of describing became too slow, and he would get fed up with it. So in that case, language actually becomes a very important part in regards to the sensory perception that we have, in regards to what we can think about. So to the extent that our sensory perception relates to the world around us really comes from your situation. And to kind of conclude this a little bit, as I am a kid losing my hearing as opposed to someone who has lost their hearing, I'm going to rely a little bit more on a verbal language, especially when I lose my hearing, as opposed to a deaf person who didn't have that verbal language to begin with. If I go to the movies and I see someone say something sad but look happy, I'll come from a different understanding. I'll come to a different understanding as a deaf person would. So I guess to sum up, the extent at which sensory perception helps you in looking at the world around you, it really depends on your situation, whether you were born deaf without a verbal language or whether that you had a verbal language and didn't acquire it. And that's my presentation, so thanks for watching.